So how does God see your job? Well, book of Colossians. We're actually going to be in chapter 3, starting in verse 22. And I've got to deal with something right up front because we're in the 21st century, and when you see the word slavery, immediately you think, what an outdated, ridiculous book. In fact, a lot of people, they look at the Bible, verses like this that we're going to read, and they say, you know what the problem? This is why Christians are so crazy. Because they believe the Bible, and the Bible endorses slavery. I could never trust a God, I could never believe in a book that doesn't condemn slavery. You feel that. I feel that. We have this sense, had the civil rights movement, and slavery was a terrible evil inflicted on countless human beings in the past and is currently to this day operating right underneath our nose. There's more people in slavery today than there's ever been in the world. There's slavery going on, and how could the scripture not just outright just say slavery is wrong? And because it doesn't. So how do we understand the text we're about to read? Well, I want you to think about New Testament slavery differently than you think about the slavery we saw in the early 20th century and the slavery we see today, sex slavery and that kind of stuff, because they're really not the same thing. And I'm not just saying that because I'm the preacher. They're really different animals. The slavery that you see in the New Testament it had less to do with race, more to do with politics. It wasn't so much prejudice as it was, my country's bigger than your country. We destroyed your country. We conquered you. And since we conquered you, we get to take your men as slaves. And that's basically what happened. And if your city got overtaken by another city, you just could imagine, I'm going to become a slave. And that's basically most of the slavery you see in the New Testament. That's not to say that that's right or that it's, not good. It isn't good, but it's different than what you see in the early 20th century. It's different than the kind of slavery that was abolished by, William Wilberforce in Britain, different than the 13th Amendment kind of thing. But the kind of slavery in particular that Colossians 3 is talking about is even different than that. The kind of slavery that Colossians 3 is talking about is, you might think of it in terms of indentured servitude. Anybody ever take a history course, learn about indentured servitude? Yeah, the best way to think about that kind of slavery is the kind of slavery you feel with your MasterCard, okay? Your MasterCard. When you swipe your MasterCard, it piles up a lot of debt, and when you swipe it a whole lot, then you get a whole lot of debt, and you feel like enslaved to the master, correct? MasterCard. But the way that you pay off your MasterCard is that you go work for your boss. You work for your boss so that you can pay off your MasterCard. And the way you did it back then isn't by working for somebody else. The way you did it back then, if somebody loaned you money, then you would actually work for the person who loaned you the money. And as soon as you paid off the debt, then you were given your rights. And households had this kind of system going on. So as you see Paul talking about the husbands do this, wives do this, children do this, parents do this, and then he gets to slaves. And you're like, slaves? What? Slaves? Well, the slaves were in the house, and the reason that they were in the house is because of this debt-debtor relationship. And that's the kind of social institution that we see in Colossians. And so instead of just writing it off, instead of getting all mad at the Bible, I want you to think of it in those kind of terms. And also remember that the kinds of things that Paul says in this text, and the things that Paul says in the book of Philemon, for example, undermine the very institution of slavery. In fact, it was those kinds of verses in the New Testament that people like William Wilberforce and Martin Luther King, they appealed to those verses. They used those verses to basically push through the civil rights movement. And so the gospel transforms not only the relationships between masters and slaves, but it actually undermines this whole prejudicial slavery, the kind of slavery that we see today, turns it on its head. So that's my brief apologetic for slavery. Let's actually look at the text now.